The CEO's voice carried across the marble lobby. "I don't shake hands with low-level employees." He said it to my face, in front of 30 witnesses, at his own company's annual gala. What Richard Morrison didn't know was that the low-level employee he'd just insulted controlled the encryption keys to his company's entire financial infrastructure. By morning, $16.1 million had vanished from Apex Digital's accounts. Before I tell you where that money went and how I made it disappear with 6 lines of code, comment below. Have you ever been disrespected by someone who had no idea who they were actually dealing with? Because what started as a handshake refusal ended with me teaching a billionaire CEO the most expensive lesson of his career. Friday evening, November 8th. I stood in the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Seattle, wearing my only suit, a 7-year-old navy blue off-the-rack special that had cost me $300. Around me, Apex Digital's executive team and major investors mingled in designer tuxedos and evening gowns, drinking champagne that probably cost more per glass than my monthly grocery budget. My name is David Park. I'm 34 years old, and for the past 6 years, I've been a senior systems architect at Apex Digital Solutions, one of the fastest-growing fintech companies in the Pacific Northwest. On paper, I'm just another tech employee, one of 1,200 people who make the company run. In reality, I'm one of 3 people in the entire organization who understand how our core financial processing system actually works. I'd built it from scratch in 2018, when Apex was still a 50-person startup. The annual gala was Richard Morrison's idea, a chance to celebrate the company's success, reward top performers, and schmooze with investors. I'd been invited because my manager, Tom Chen, insisted that the technical team should be represented. "You built the system that processes $4 billion annually," Tom had said. "You deserve to be there." I hadn't wanted to come. These events weren't my scene. Too much small talk, too much performance, too much pretending that corporate hierarchy was based on merit rather than charisma and political skill. But Tom had been a good boss for 6 years, so I'd put on my cheap suit and showed up. The evening started fine. I grabbed a drink from the bar, found a quiet corner, and watched the spectacle unfold. Richard Morrison worked the room like a politician, shaking hands, remembering names, laughing at jokes that probably weren't funny. He was 52, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of commanding presence that made people want to follow him. Apex Digital had grown from a startup to a $600 million company under his leadership. He'd closed major deals, attracted top-tier investors, and positioned the company for a potential IPO within 2 years. By every external measure, Richard Morrison was a success. Around 8:30 p.m., Tom found me. "David, come on. Richard's doing a meet and greet with the technical teams. He wants to personally thank everyone who made this year's growth possible." "Tom, I'm good here. 5 minutes. Just shake his hand, accept the thanks, and you can leave early. I promise." I followed Tom to a roped-off section where Richard held court with about 20 employees, mostly VPs and directors, a handful of senior engineers and product managers. We queued up, corporate receiving line style, waiting our turn for the CEO's attention. When we reached the front, Tom spoke first. "Richard, this is David Park, Senior Systems Architect. He built our core financial processing platform." Richard's smile was practiced, professional. He extended his hand toward Tom. "Tom, great to see you. Your team's been crushing it this year." Tom gestured to me. "Richard, David's the one who." Richard's eyes flicked to me briefly, then back to Tom. "Your team's technical work has been solid. Really solid. Tell your people I appreciate their contributions." He still hadn't looked at me directly. His hand remained extended toward Tom, not me. Tom tried again. "Richard, David specifically built this system that processes." "I understand. Technical infrastructure. Very important work." Richard's tone was dismissive, his attention already shifting to the next person in line, a VP of sales whose name he apparently knew. "Marcus, great quarter. Let's talk about Q4 projections." I stood there, hand half extended, as the CEO of my company literally turned his back on me to talk to someone more important. Tom looked mortified. "David, I'm so sorry. It's fine. I'm going to head out. No, wait. Let me say something. Tom, it's fine. Really. But it wasn't fine. Not because my feelings were hurt. I'd learned long ago that corporate executives didn't value technical work the way they valued sales and marketing. What bothered me was the casual disrespect, the assumption that someone in a cheap suit wasn't worth 5 seconds of acknowledgement. I was heading toward the exit when I heard Richard's voice boom across the room. Everyone, can I have your attention, please? He stood on a small stage at the front of the ballroom, microphone in hand, that megawatt smile locked in place. I want to take a moment to thank all of you, our executives, our investors, our top performers, for making Apex Digital what it is today. He continued, listing accomplishments, citing revenue numbers, praising his leadership team by name. Then he got to the part that made my blood boil. Now, I know we have some technical folks here tonight. Engineers, developers, the people who write the code that makes everything work. And I want you to know your contributions matter. The nuts and bolts, the back-end infrastructure, the invisible work that keeps the lights on. That's all important. The pause before important was slight but noticeable, like he was searching for a word that wouldn't sound dismissive and landing on one anyway. But let's be honest about what really drives success in this industry. Vision, leadership, the ability to close deals and build relationships with major clients. That's what separates good companies from great ones. That's what separates. He gestured to the executives on stage with him, the people who lead from the people who support. A woman near me, another engineer I vaguely recognized, muttered, "Did he just call us all support staff?" Richard wasn't done. So to our engineering teams, to our technical folks, thank you for your support. To our executives and leaders, thank you for your vision. Together, we're building something extraordinary. Now let's enjoy the rest of the evening. Applause filled the room. I watched Richard step off the stage, immediately surrounded by investors and VPs, everyone wanting a moment of his time. Tom appeared at my elbow. That was tone-deaf. That was honest, I said quietly. He actually believes technical work is just support for the real business of vision and leadership. Not everyone thinks that way. Richard does, and he's the CEO. I left the gala at 9:15 p.m., drove home to my modest apartment in Fremont, and sat on my couch staring at nothing. Here's what Richard Morrison didn't know about the low-level support staff he'd just dismissed. The core financial processing system that Apex Digital used. The one that handled $4 billion in annual transactions, the one that every single client depended on, the one that made the entire company possible. I hadn't just built it. I maintained exclusive administrative access to it. This wasn't supposed to be the case. Best practices dictate that multiple people should have admin access to critical systems, that no single person should be a point of failure. But when I built the system in 2018, Apex was small and fast-moving. I'd been given carte blanche to design and implement however I saw fit. I'd created a secure, encrypted, distributed architecture with multiple redundancies and fail-safes. And I'd built in a master administrative access layer that only I controlled, initially as a safety measure, a way to recover the system if something went catastrophically wrong. Over the years, as Apex grew, the plan was always to transition that access to a broader team. But it never happened. I kept meaning to document the handoff process. Tom kept meaning to schedule the knowledge transfer sessions, and everyone kept being too busy with growth and new features to worry about administrative protocols. So 6 years later, I remained the only person with full access to the encryption keys, the administrative passwords, and the core architecture documentation for a system that processed $11 million per day. Richard Morrison had just publicly dismissed me as support staff. Low level. Someone not worth shaking hands with. He had no idea that the low-level employee he'd insulted had the technical ability to shut down his entire company with a few keystrokes. I wasn't going to shut it down, but I was going to teach him a lesson he'd never forget. Saturday morning, I woke up at 6 a.m. with perfect clarity about what I was going to do. I wasn't going to steal money. I wasn't going to damage the system. I wasn't going to do anything illegal or unethical. But I was going to demonstrate, In terms Richard Morrison couldn't ignore exactly how much power the low-level support staff actually held. I made coffee and opened my laptop. The core financial processing system, what we internally called the Apex Transaction Engine, or ATE, had been designed with multiple security layers. Client funds moved through a series of encrypted accounts, processing nodes, and verification checkpoints before reaching their final destinations. One of the safety features I built was a quarantine protocol, a way to temporarily isolate funds if the system detected potential fraud or security threats. Quarantined funds would be frozen in a secure holding account, flagged for manual review, and released only after verification by authorized administrators. The protocol had been used maybe a dozen times in 6 years, always for legitimate security reasons, always with proper documentation. I pulled up the administrative interface and reviewed the quarantine protocols. The system was elegant in its simplicity. Any transaction could be flagged with a security code, automatically routed to the holding account, and frozen until an admin manually released it. Here's what I was going to do. On Monday morning, when the weekly transfer of processed transaction fees hit the system, the money Apex Digital earned from client transactions, roughly $16.1 million based on last week's volume, I would trigger the quarantine protocol. The funds would be frozen in the secure holding account, flagged as security review required. From Apex's perspective, $16.1 million would simply vanish. The money wouldn't be in the expected operating accounts. It wouldn't be accessible to finance, to accounting, to anyone. The company would have no idea where it went or how to retrieve it. And only I would have the administrative access to release it. Was it petty? Absolutely. Was it risky? Definitely. Was it going to make a point? Without question. I spent Saturday documenting everything. Not because I was worried about legal exposure, but because I wanted a clear record of my intentions. This wasn't theft or sabotage. This was a controlled demonstration of system security protocols by the systems architect. I wrote out the technical steps, the timeline, the recovery process. I drafted an email to Tom explaining what I'd done and why. I even prepared a presentation for Richard Morrison titled The Value of Technical Infrastructure, a Case Study. Sunday, I did nothing related to Apex. I went hiking, had dinner with friends, watched a movie. I needed to be certain this wasn't just anger or hurt feelings driving me. This needed to be a calculated decision, not an emotional reaction. By Sunday night, I was certain. Richard Morrison had publicly dismissed the technical work that made his entire company possible. He'd refused to shake my hand because I wasn't important enough. He called us support staff while praising the real leaders. He needed to learn what happened when the support staff stopped supporting. Monday morning, I arrived at the office at 7:30 a.m., earlier than usual, but not suspiciously early. The Apex offices in downtown Seattle were mostly empty, just a handful of other early arrivals grabbing coffee and settling in. I logged into my workstation and pulled up the administrative interface for ATE. The weekly fee transfer was scheduled to process at 8 a.m., a routine operation that happened every Monday without fail. Client transaction fees from the previous week would be aggregated, verified, and transferred to Apex's operating accounts. At 7:55 a.m., I implemented the quarantine protocol. 6 lines of code, carefully inserted into the transfer process. If transfer underscore type equals weekly underscore fee underscore aggregate, then apply underscore quarantine underscore flag, security underscore review underscore required. Root underscore to underscore holding underscore account, secure underscore QT underscore 001. Lock underscore funds, admin underscore release underscore NLY. Notify underscore admin, parkd at apexdigital.com. End if. Simple, elegant, and completely within my administrative authority. I hit enter and watched the code deploy across the system. At exactly 8 a.m., the weekly transfer initiated. I watched in real time as $16,147,392.18 moved through the processing pipeline, hit my quarantine checkpoint, and automatically rerouted to the secure holding account. From a systems perspective, everything had worked perfectly. A potential security issue had been detected, funds had been safely quarantined, and the appropriate administrator had been notified. From Apex Digital's perspective, $16.1 million had just disappeared. I closed my laptop and went to get more coffee. The first sign of trouble came at 9:47 a.m. Sarah Kim, our VP of Finance, walked quickly past my desk toward Tom's office, her expression tense. 5 minutes later, Tom emerged looking confused and concerned. By 10:30 a.m., a meeting had been called in the main conference room. I could see through the glass walls. Sarah, Tom, our CTO Marcus Webb, and several other executives huddled around a laptop, pointing at screens, making urgent phone calls. At 11:15 a.m., Tom came to my desk. "David, can you come to the conference room? We have a situation with ATE." "What kind of situation?" "The weekly fee transfer didn't process correctly. Finance shows the transfer initiated, but the funds never arrived in the operating accounts. Sarah's freaking out because we have payroll processing Wednesday and vendor payments due Thursday. We need that $60 million. I followed Tom to the conference room, maintaining a carefully neutral expression. Inside, Marcus Webb was on the phone with our banking partner. "No, the funds definitely left the client processing accounts. Our log shows successful transfer at 8 a.m., but they are not in our operating accounts. Can you check your end for any holds or delays?" He listened, then shook his head. "Nothing. Okay, keep looking. Call me back." Sarah saw me and practically pounced. "David, thank God. The transaction engine shows a successful transfer, but the money's gone. Not in our accounts, not showing up anywhere in the banking system. Can you trace where it went?" "Let me look at the logs." I opened my laptop and pulled up the transfer records, making a show of reviewing the data I'd already seen. Here's the transfer initiation at 8 a.m., processing through the standard nodes. And then I paused, as if noticing something unexpected. It triggered a quarantine protocol. "A what?" Sarah looked panicked. "Quarantine protocol. It's a security feature. If the system detects potential fraud or irregularities, it automatically routes funds to a secure holding account for manual review." Marcus leaned forward. "Why would it trigger on a routine weekly transfer?" "I'm not sure. Let me check the security flags." I made a show of typing, reviewing code that I'd written 2 days ago. "It's flagged as security review required. No specific threat identified, just a general security trigger. Can you release it?" Sarah's voice was rising. "We need that money for operations." "I can, but I need to understand why it triggered first. If there's a legitimate security concern." "David." Sarah's tone was sharp. "We have $16.1 million frozen in some account you apparently control, and we need it released immediately. Whatever security review is necessary can happen after the funds are back in our operating accounts." "That's not how security protocols work, Sarah. If I just release funds without understanding why they were quarantined, I could be enabling fraud or—" "There's no fraud. It's our money from our clients' transaction fees. Release it. Now." I looked at Tom, who nodded apologetically. "David, I know you want to follow protocol, but this is causing a major cash flow problem. Can you release it and do the security review after? I need authorization from executive leadership to override security protocols. That's standard procedure." Marcus stood up. "Fine. I'm the CTO. I'm giving you authorization. Release the funds. I need it in writing. An email with explicit authorization to override security protocols and release quarantined funds without completing standard security review." "Are you serious right now?" Sarah looked like she wanted to throw her laptop at me. "I'm very serious. I built these protocols to protect the company. If I override them without proper authorization, I'm personally liable if something goes wrong." Marcus was already typing on his phone. "Fine. You'll have your email in 2 minutes. Then release the damn money." His email arrived 90 seconds later. "David, per our conversation, you are authorized to override security protocols and release the quarantined funds from this morning's weekly transfer. Execute immediately. Marcus Webb, CTO." I read it carefully, then looked up. "I also need authorization from a CEO. Financial decisions of this magnitude require C-level approval." Richard's in meetings all morning, Marcus said. Sarah's the VP of Finance. That's enough authorization. Actually, per company policy on security overrides, I need CEO approval for any release over $10 million. It's in the security documentation I submitted when I built the system. Sarah looked at Marcus. Is he right? Marcus rubbed his face. I don't know. I've never read the full security documentation. David, can you just... No, I need proper authorization. Get Richard to send an email approving the release, and I'll execute immediately. Sarah grabbed her phone and stepped out of the room. Through the glass walls, I watched her making an urgent call, gesturing emphatically. She came back 3 minutes later. Richard's at a breakfast meeting with investors. He said to handle it ourselves. That's why he has executives. Then we wait until Richard can provide written authorization. David. Tom's voice was quiet but firm. You're being difficult. This is a routine internal transfer that got caught by an overly sensitive security filter. We all know there's no actual threat. Release the money. I looked at my boss, the man who'd been good to me for 6 years, who'd fought for my raises, who'd respected my technical expertise even when others didn't. Tom, I'm not being difficult. I'm following the protocols I designed to protect this company. If Richard Morrison doesn't think this is worth interrupting his breakfast meeting to authorize, then maybe he doesn't understand how critical technical infrastructure actually is. The room went silent. Everyone understood what I'd just implied. Marcus spoke carefully. David, are you making this difficult because of what happened at the gala? This has nothing to do with the gala. This has to do with security protocols and proper authorization for financial decisions. Bullshit. Sarah's voice was cold. You're pissed that Richard didn't pay enough attention to you Friday night. So now you're throwing a tantrum and holding company funds hostage. That's what's actually happening here. I closed my laptop. If that's what you believe, then you should probably escalate this to Richard immediately. Explain that the low-level support staff has frozen $16 million and won't release it without his personal authorization. I'm sure he'll be very interested to learn that the technical infrastructure he dismissed as support work has this much power over his company's operations. I stood up. When Richard sends written authorization to override security protocols and release the funds, I'll execute within 5 minutes. Until then, the money stays in secure quarantine per the protocols I built. If you don't like those protocols, you're welcome to fire me and find someone else who understands the system well enough to access it. I walked out of the conference room, went back to my desk, and opened a technical documentation file. I didn't have to wait long. At 1:37 p.m., my phone rang. Richard Morrison's office number. David, this is Richard. I understand we have a situation with the weekly transfer. Yes, sir. Security protocols quarantine the funds. I need CEO authorization to release them. Marcus explained the situation. I'm emailing you authorization now. Please release the funds immediately. Before I do, I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss the security incident. We need to understand why the quarantine triggered. That can wait. Business operations take priority. Release the funds. Mr. Morrison, with respect, security can't wait. If there's a vulnerability in the system. David. His voice hardened. I've been told you're making this difficult because of some perceived slight at Friday's gala. Let me be very clear. I don't have time for hurt feelings or office drama. You have your authorization. Execute the release, and then we'll discuss your future with this company. There it was. The threat. The reminder of who had power. I understand, sir. I'll release the funds immediately upon receiving your written authorization. And yes, we should definitely discuss my future with the company. I have some thoughts on that. I hung up and waited. The email arrived 2 minutes later. David Park. Authorization is granted to override security protocols and release quarantine funds from 11/11's weekly transfer. Execute immediately and report completion. Richard Morrison, CEO, Apex Digital Solutions. I forwarded the email to Tom, Marcus, and Sarah with a simple note. Releasing funds now per CEO authorization. Will complete within 5 minutes. Then I accessed the administrative interface, disabled the quarantine flag, and released the $16.1 million back to Apex's operating accounts. At 1:52 p.m., I sent confirmation. Funds released and transferred successfully. Operating account should reflect full balance within 15 minutes. Sarah responded immediately. Confirmed. Funds received. What was the security issue? I didn't answer. Instead, I opened a new document and began writing. At 3 p.m., I was called to Richard Morrison's office. His corner office had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound, custom furniture, and artwork that probably cost more than I made in a year. Richard sat behind his massive desk, Marcus and Tom flanking him like corporate sentries. Sit down, David. Richard's voice was controlled but angry. I Saturday. Explain what happened this morning. The weekly fee transfer triggered a security quarantine protocol I designed 6 years ago. The protocol worked exactly as intended. Suspicious activity flagged. Funds secured. Administrator notified. What suspicious activity? That's what the security review would have determined. But I was instructed to override the protocol and release funds without completing the review, so we'll never know. David. Marcus sounded tired. Come on. There was no suspicious activity. The quarantine triggered incorrectly. Did it? Or did it correctly identify a security issue that we're now ignoring because operational convenience outweighed security protocols? Richard leaned forward. Let me tell you what I think happened. I think you deliberately triggered that quarantine to cause a crisis because I didn't shake your hand at the gala. I think this was a tantrum thrown by an employee who felt disrespected. Do you have evidence of that? I have the evidence of timing. The day after the gala, suddenly our routine transfer has a mysterious security issue that only you can fix. That's not coincidence. I pulled out my laptop. Mr. Morrison, can I show you something? He nodded impatiently. I opened the Apex Transaction Engine Administrative Interface. This is the core system that processes every financial transaction Apex Digital handles. $4 billion annually, $11 million per day. Everything you've built, every client relationship, every dollar of revenue, every investor promise about IPO readiness, depends on this system working flawlessly. I'm aware of what the system does. Are you aware that I'm the only person in this company with full administrative access? That I control the encryption keys, the security protocols, the recovery procedures? That if I were hit by a bust tomorrow, Apex Digital would need to shut down operations for weeks while outside consultants tried to reverse engineer access? The room went quiet. Tom spoke first. David, we've been meaning to address the knowledge transfer. For 6 years, Tom. 6 years of meaning to. Do you know why it never happened? Because this company treats technical infrastructure as an afterthought. Something that happens in the background while the real leaders focus on vision and deal closing. I looked directly at Richard. Friday night, you told a room full of people that technical work is just support for real leadership. You couldn't spare 5 seconds to shake my hand because I'm not important enough. This morning, when $16 million disappeared, suddenly technical infrastructure seemed pretty important. Suddenly the low-level support staff had everyone's attention. So you admit this was retaliation, Richard said coldly. I admit this was education. You needed to learn what happens when you dismiss the people who actually make your company function. Consider it learned. You're fired. Effective immediately. I'd expected this. That's your right. But before you escort me out, understand what you're losing. I'm the only person who fully understands its architecture. I'm the only one with administrative access. And while I've been professional enough to document everything and prepare a transition plan, I pulled a thick folder from my bag. Finding someone capable of taking over is going to take months and cost you hundreds of thousands in consultant fees. I slid the folder across the desk. This is complete system documentation, including all administrative passwords, encryption keys, and recovery procedures. It's also my 2 weeks' notice. I'm not interested in remaining somewhere I'm considered low-level support, so I'm resigning. But I'm professional enough to ensure a proper transition. Richard stayed at the folder without touching it. You planned this. The quarantine, the authorization requirements, this resignation, all of it. I plan to demonstrate the value of technical infrastructure, yes, and to ensure that whoever comes after me inherits a properly documented system instead of the mess I inherited. You're welcome. Marcus picked up the folder, flipping through pages of dense technical documentation. This is comprehensive. It's everything. 6 years of architecture decisions, security protocols, maintenance procedures, and tribal knowledge, all documented. Your next systems architect will still need months to absorb it, but at least they'll have a roadmap. Tom looked miserable. David, don't resign. We can work this out. Tom, you've been a great boss, but I don't want to work somewhere the CEO thinks I'm not worth a handshake. I have skills, I have experience, and I have enough money saved to be selective about what comes next. I stood up. I'll work the next 2 weeks to ensure a smooth transition. I'll train whoever you designate as my successor. I'll make myself available for questions for 60 days after my departure. But then I'm done. Richard finally spoke. You made your point. Technical infrastructure matters. Is that what you want to hear? I don't want to hear anything, Mr. Morrison. I wanted you to understand it. This morning, you learned that lesson the hard way. Whether you internalize it or dismiss it as an irritating employee problem, that's your choice. I walked to the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Apex Digital is a good company. The work matters, the clients are solid, and you've built something real. But if you keep treating your technical teams as disposable support staff, eventually they'll leave. And when they do, you'll discover that vision and leadership don't mean much when your core systems stop working. I left Richard Morrison's office and went back to my desk. My resignation triggered immediate panic in Apex Digital's technical leadership. Marcus Webb spent the next 3 days trying to find someone, anyone, who could take over as primary ATE administrator. They contacted former employees, consulted with outside firms, even reached out to the original consulting company that had helped staff the initial build. Nobody had the combination of system knowledge, security expertise, and institutional familiarity to step in quickly. On Thursday, Marcus appeared at my desk. David, can we talk? Privately. We went to an empty conference room. Richard's willing to make a counteroffer. Significant raise, new title, formal recognition of your contributions. I'm not interested. Marcus, at least hear the offer. $220,000 base salary, up from your current $165,000. Senior principal architect title. Direct report to me instead of Tom. Guaranteed seat in technical strategy meetings. It was a good offer. Nearly 40% raise, better title, more influence. Marcus, 3 days ago Richard fired me for demonstrating how critical my work is. Now he's offering me a raise to stay because he's realized he actually needs me. Do you see why that's not appealing? Marcus sighed. Look, Richard can be difficult. He values visible contributions over behind-the-scenes work. That's a flaw in his leadership style, but is not a bad person and is genuinely concerned about what happens if you leave. He's concerned about operational disruption. That's not the same as valuing my work. What would it take for you to stay? I thought about it. Honestly, nothing. This isn't about money or title anymore. It's about working somewhere I'm respected for what I do, not just tolerated because I'm hard to replace. Richard made it clear Friday night how he views technical staff. I believe him. He's willing to apologize. I don't want an apology. I want to work somewhere the CEO understands that vision and leadership are worthless without solid technical execution. That's not Apex, so I'm leaving. Marcus stood up. Okay, I understand. For what it's worth, I'm sorry this is how it's ending. You built something remarkable, hey. Thanks, Marcus. That actually means something coming from you. Over the next 2 weeks, I trained Sarah Martinez, a senior engineer Marcus hired specifically to take over ATE administration. Sarah was sharp, asked good questions, and absorbed information quickly. By the end of week 2, she had functional access and enough understanding to keep operations running. It's going to take me 6 months to understand this fully, Sarah said on my last day. Maybe longer. That's about right. Take your time. Don't be afraid to say I don't know when executives push you. And Sarah, document everything. Make sure you're not the only person who understands this system. Did Richard ever apologize? For the gala thing? No. He sent a company-wide email thanking me for my 6 years of contributions and wishing me well. Very professional, very impersonal. That sucks. It's fine. I learned what I needed to learn. My exit interview was with HR, not with Richard. Standard questions about why I was leaving, what could have been done differently, whether I'd recommend Apex to other technical professionals. I answered honestly but diplomatically. The written record would show an amicable parting over differences in career goals and company culture fit. On my last day, Tom took me to lunch. I'm sorry, David. I should have pushed harder for knowledge transfer, for better recognition of your work, for a lot of things. Tom, you were a great boss. You respected technical work and fought for your team. The problem was above your pay grade. What are you going to do next? I have some consulting offers. A couple of startups want help building financial processing systems. I might take 6 months and just breathe, figure out what I actually want. You'll land somewhere good. Any company would be lucky to have you. That afternoon, I packed my desk, returned my laptop and badge, and walked out of Apex Digital's offices for the last time. I felt lighter than I had in years. Richard Morrison called me on a Tuesday afternoon in May. I was sitting on my apartment balcony, reading a technical book and enjoying unemployment. David, this is Richard Morrison. Do you have a few minutes? I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Hello, Richard. What can I do for you? I wanted to give you an update on Apex. We closed our Series C funding round last month. $85 million at a $750 million valuation. We're on track for IPO in 18 months. Congratulations. That's impressive growth. Sarah Martinez is doing well as lead architect. She's hired 2 additional senior engineers to share the ATE administrative load. Your documentation was invaluable. I'm glad it helped. Silence for a moment. Then, I also wanted to say I was wrong. About the technical team being support staff. About not shaking your hand. About how I handled the whole situation. Okay. I didn't understand how critical back-end infrastructure was until you demonstrated it. That was an expensive lesson, but a necessary one. I've changed how I interact with our technical teams. Monthly engineering all hands where I present strategy and take questions. Direct access for principal architects to raise concerns. Better comp structures for technical roles. That's good to hear, Richard. Sincerely. I'm calling because I want to offer you a position. VP of Engineering Infrastructure. You'd report directly to me. Build whatever team you need. Set your own priorities. Full authority over technical architecture decisions. $350,000 base plus equity. It was a hell of an offer. Triple my original salary. Real authority. Genuine respect. I appreciate the offer, Richard. But I'm not interested. Can I ask why? Because I don't want to work for someone who needed $16 million to disappear before understanding that technical expertise matters. I want to work somewhere that values that expertise from day one. Fair enough. But, David, I am genuinely sorry. For the handshake, for the comments at the gala, for not seeing what you contributed until it was almost too late. I accept your apology. Are you happy with whatever you're doing now? I looked at my calendar. 3 consulting projects, 2 startup advisory roles, and enough saved money to be selective about what came next. Yeah, Richard, I'm happy. I'm working with people who value technical excellence. I'm building interesting systems. And nobody's calling me support staff. Then I'm glad it worked out. If you ever change your mind. I won't, but I hope Apex succeeds. Despite everything, I'm proud of what I built there. After hanging up, I thought about the lesson Richard had learned. Power isn't always visible. The people who make your systems work, who keep your operations running, who build the infrastructure that enables everything else, those people matter. Dismiss them, disrespect them, treat them as interchangeable parts, and eventually you'll learn otherwise. Richard Morrison learned that lesson when $16.1 million vanished because he wouldn't shake hands with a low-level employee. It was an expensive education, but some lessons are worth the cost. I don't regret making him pay tuition. If you're reading this and thinking about the bosses who've underestimated you, the executives who've dismissed your contributions, the leaders who couldn't see your value. Remember this: your worth doesn't depend on their recognition. Build things that matter. Do work that's solid. And when the moment comes that they realize what they are losing, you'll have the power to choose whether they deserve a second chance.